Well, it's the time you've all been waiting for. It's time for us to go into a deep dive. The Continental has opened for business. Do you want a room? What's up, my know-it-alls? It's time. The Continental has opened for business. So tell me, are you ready for what's about to come down? The very first episode is called, this 3-part miniseries that fell on Peacock is literally called Brothers in Arms. Now, the basic premise of the series, for those of you who came in late, is that this takes place in the 1970s. Specifically, it follows the rise of Winston Scott, the character that was played by Ian McShane in the John Wick franchise. And it centers around the Continental. The guy who's running it currently is Mel Gibson's own Cormac. And I tell you what, there's such an interesting storyline that's happening here. So rather than kind of go deep into all of the various machinations of how it all works, listen, you need to watch it. It's 90 minutes. The first episode drops this week. The next episode drops next week and then the week after that. And we're going to cover all of them. So if you haven't had an opportunity to get caught up yet on the Continental and the world of John Wick, do yourself a big favor, go watch it first. Or if you want, click on the video that's up here in the little title card right up here, and you'll be able to find for yourself all the nitty-gritty about John Wick's deep, dark, dirty world. So, okay, several things. I'm just gonna go through the list. Action, check, and it does very well. The directors have been quoted as saying they were trying their best to carry over the sense and feel of the movies, the John Wick films, into this television experience. And I think from that respect, they did a good job. Aspects of the city feel like a set or a sound stage. Specifically when they're in, there is a part where they go into Chinatown in 1970s New York, and it feels kind of, it felt like a set a little bit. Maybe it's just how clean everything was. Not clean, but like just it looked purposefully. So I think in that regard, I know that most of this was shot in Budapest, and because obviously there's very similar construction and whatnot, architectural stuff from that era. And so the story starts with the Continental on New Year's Eve 1970. And actually, the story starts in 1955, and you get to see black and white of Winston and his brother Frankie, who are children, and Frankie takes the blame, and you can see them through the two-way glass of an interrogation room, and Frankie's literally telling his brother, he's like, hey, just shut up, the cops are gonna try to get you to talk. You don't forget, you didn't do anything wrong, I'm the one who did it. And he keeps saying that to him. And then we flash, that was 1955. Now we flash to 1970, and it's a very different game. And specifically, we find Frankie, all tattoos, played by, I wanna say Victor Robson, who plays, he's in Vikings. And so he's doing an amazing job playing this really awesome badass. He went in the back way, he has some ready repartee, he goes through the main, where the main party's happening in the main ballroom of the Continental, and he runs into Mel Gibson's Cormac, who's kind of gets up, he's like, hey, this is Frankie, this guy, they share a drink, and he's like, I brought him in when he was this big, and this and that, and you kind of get the feel and sense. Frankie doesn't really want to be there, and he walks away, and Mel Gibson's kind of giving him the stink eye as he leaves, and ultimately, Frankie steals something out of the vault. It's this really interesting moment where he uses a train. So through the subway, he has a hook, and this train grabs the hook and yanks the locking mechanism off the vault. Very, very brilliant. And he steals, it's a coin press. Now, I can only assume it's for the gold coins that are sold, or used rather, as currency within the walls of the Continental. And so that's and that's the main, by the way, that's the predominant plot. Now, there's several other subplots at work here. Obviously, Winston comes into play. He's in London doing some shady business deals with this one lady, helping her husband rip off this guy of millions of dollars and whatnot. And he's like working and building parking garages for all these big skyscrapers. It's a money-making scheme, whatever. And so he gets kidnapped by these masked individuals who have been sent to come find him. Fast forward to New York. There's I don't know if it's a B plot, but I guess we'll call it a B plot. There's this police officer, a female police officer who she's screwing her boss or whatever, and she's tracking down this this arms deal that's happening, this selling gun running that's going on, and it's Frankie she's tracking. And the tracking takes her to the very front doors of the Continental, to which her partner, the guy she's screwing, is like, are you crazy? Absolutely not. Not partner, he's her superior. And he stops her and he's like, hey, sorry, whatever. And he literally tells her, he's like, don't ever go in that building. And at first she thinks, because she's the first female detective. And so at first she thinks it's about that, and he's trying to protect her, and he's like, just trust me. He clearly knows something about what's going down, and she don't want to listen. So again, tough broad, love the way they're characterizing her. I'm very into the mood, by the way. I'm very into the 70s feel of this whole thing. What you end up with is a very interesting moment where she later on walks into the Continental, doesn't want to listen to nothing. She walks in, she goes to the bar, she buys a drink, and she tries to give the guy cash, and the guy's like, what? And he looks over at somebody else who's nearby. I don't know what role that guy plays, a guy with some shades on, and the guy's like, yeah, whatever. And she tries to get a room, they say it's full, and she notices people passing gold coins, she leaves. She doesn't know what she's getting into, but it's about to go down with her. And we don't see much more of her in this part one. So I'm gonna go ahead and just I wanted to get that out of the way so that we can continue back into the actual big story that's happening. Winston wakes up at the actual Continental. He's in front of Cormac, and Cormac having just made a guy jump out the window for failing him to find the press. And so the whole conversation between them, apparently after the incident that we saw in the very beginning, the 1955 incident, Frankie and him parted ways and haven't talked in like 20 some odd years. So they both stayed with one guy, whatever else, and eventually Frankie got in bed with Cormac working for him, and Cormac is apparently the very reason that his dad was killed or his dad died. So it's a very shady situation that you're like, I don't know what the whole backstory is. And ultimately, you get to see a young Sharon, which is great, and which is awesome. I love the young man's playing him. I really feel like he's embodying a lot of that energy that came from the previous actor, and it's really I'm enjoying seeing that particular role being carried out. Plus, they seem to be just relishing being in this 1970s nostalgia world. So after a few words with Mel Gibson, it comes out flat out that he has no clue. He, being Winston, has no idea where his brother is. They haven't talked in forever, and so ultimately he's like, all right, we'll let him go, whatever else. And the idea is, of course, he's going to follow him. So what does Winston do? Winston's Winston. He goes out looking for his brother. He goes back to some folks. He borrows a car, a Shelby GT Mustang, which is dope. And then he goes searching. And he hears the rumor that he used to hang out in Chinatown, so he goes to Chinatown. He meets up with this crew of people. I didn't understand what this was. These guys are straight up Chekhov's gun, in my opinion. You're gonna find out why shortly. And so they're like, we run guns, this and that. We work with Frankie. Frankie abandoned us, this and that. We don't know anything about it. We don't want anything to do with him. It's these very Black Power looking, very Black Panthers-y type folks. Dude's got the afro, the black turtleneck, the leather jacket, and his girl is his sister rather is she owns their parents' old kung fu place. I find it totally ironic and very much a nod to that era of blaxploitation, that the martial arts dojo is owned by Black folks, which I'm like, yes, so great, so cool, so unbelievable. And so then he sees, and they've got a whole downstairs full of guns. Try and think that ain't gonna come back. So what happens? He eventually gets the idea to go by some place that they used to go as children, and there he finds his brother Frankie and Frankie's wife Yen. Yen's a regular badass on her own. Yen's all martial arts and kicking butt, and she's amazing. But she doesn't trust anybody, and she's only looking out for Frankie, her husband. And there's genuine love there. It's not just I really appreciated that relationship for what it was. So then you get into this whole thing where they're like, we gotta go, we gotta escape, this and that. And his brother realizes they have this moment and they talk. And that's where you get that whole backstory about them. So finally, through some other people, they figure out and they're gonna leave, and they try to escape, and they go back to the same guy who helped to give him the car and whatnot, and one of them turns him in. And that's when all of Cormac's people come rushing in, and it's literally an all-out balls to the wall fight to try to get away. And so they make it, and they get to the roof of this one building, and they make it to the helicopter that is waiting for them. And Cormac brought in some hired help. You're not gonna get the Continental and not have the hired help. You're not gonna have okay, so you get he calls them the weirdos. And it's this.
Give me the weirdos.
It's these literally, they call them the twins, and they are rough. So they're both like snipers and they're taking people out and whatnot. Frankie decides, he's like, look, you saved my wife. And then he takes the box with the press, jumps down, and sacrifices himself. And it's sad and it's rough. Cormac gets all the way back to, Cormac gets the thing. He opens up the box. It's a little monkey doll giving the middle finger. I feel like that says everything that needs to be said right there. We end this episode with Winston arriving back at the dojo, and he said, and this is that scene you've seen in the trailer where he goes, I need guns. Lots of guns. And I'm just like, bro. Overall, there you go. Now you know it. If knowing's half the battle, you're halfway to being a know-it-all yourself. What is the know-it-all index for this episode of The Continental? I really dug this. I feel like a lot of the acting is there. Everyone's feeling very comfortable. I don't think they achieved what they were trying to do in terms of giving it a very hugely cinematic look. The color grading's awesome, but overall, I still felt like I was watching a made-for-TV movie in that context. All of the stunts are amazing. All those pieces coming together real good. Mel Gibson's clearly having a good time. Oh yeah, no doubt. He's having such a great time. It's ridiculous, but he is absolutely loving what he's doing, and I'm here for it because you can tell he loves being a bad guy. Ironic or not? But yeah, so comment below. Let me know what you thought. If you haven't, have you checked it out? Check it out. Check it out for yourself. I think you're gonna like it. I enjoyed it. I know that there's 2 more parts, and I can't wait to see them. So, again, I feel like if you're gonna do this kind of thing, the story needs to be bigger than where I feel like they went real small, but also apparently Winston has little to no knowledge of the Continental, the high table, any of those things. By the way, the high table, quote unquote, makes a brief appearance in terms of being mentioned and whatnot. Lady with a mask. It's a very interesting scene. And it's one of those things where I always imagined Winston was already privy to all of this. I kind of always imagined Winston came up like a John. Or if you remember Halle Berry's character in John Wick 3, where she's already a proprietor, hotel owner to the place in the Middle East, and in the desert rather, and I think Winston wasn't. He was a savvy business guy. He clearly knows a little bit about how to control himself and maneuver himself. But so clear he knows how to be shady, but he's not that. I always envisioned he came up through this world, but apparently he didn't. He's only being introduced to it by his brother. So I find myself wondering, how do you go from knowing nothing to suddenly being a full-on proprietor of one of the Continentals? That's a question they're gonna have to answer, and it's gonna have to be a believable and working answer. So my score for this episode is a 7.5. It's a well-earned 7.5. I think the episode does a great job of setting up a lot of things. And what's great is you see him almost immediately at the gate. You see the rules in play. You see all these elements that we recognize as being the beginnings of. At one point during some of their conversations, Cormac is having someone showing him a suit and explaining the different ways that the suit can help. It isn't a full-on bulletproof suit because we can't go straight to that technology yet, but it's enough you can tell. Again, you see the beginnings of what's going to eventually become the Continental we know. Just like, I really do love, if you look at Winston, I can absolutely see the guy he's going to one day become. So there you go, guys. We'll talk to you soon. Comment below. I can't wait to look further into this. All right. Talk to you later. Never forget, everyone loves a know-it-all.